So great. Thank you so much, everyone, for this. So I want to welcome everyone again to this webinar, which will shed some light on how OpenStreetMap works in practice in helping cycling cities and also any other cities monitor progress in expanding cycling infrastructure. This session also gives an insight on the Cycling Cities campaign launched last year, which brings cities, NGOs, civil society, and private sector partners together towards a common goal, which is increasing safe cycling in cities. I also wanted to welcome a very exciting panel of speakers who dive deeper into how they are using OpenStreetMap and how cycling cities can do the same. So first, we will hear from Taylor Wright, them, they pronouns, who is a senior research associate on ITDP's global team, responsible for impact assessment and data analytics. Taylor will talk about the role of open data for cycling cities and any cities, and they will also do a short demo of the OSM features. Next, we'll hear from Dennis Paz Jimenez, who is a project and business development manager at Trufi Association. Trufi is an NGO that works on bringing open data apps to global South cities, including apps for active transport and multimodal transport. He will talk about open data from the perspective of decision-making and advocacy. Our third speaker, Felipe Alves, is a transportation engineer and cycling advocate who is a former director at Brazil's Cyclists Union, where he also was the coordinator of Cyclomapa, a web platform developed by UCB and ITDP Brazil that uses OSM to map cycling infrastructure in Brazilian cities. He will talk about how tools like Cyclomapa can fill the gap in cycling data. And finally, we will conclude the formal presentations with Dana Yanoka, who will also moderate the panel discussion. Dana is a research manager at ITDP Global, who is spearheading the Cycling Cities campaign. She will talk about how OSM can be useful in calculating the people near bike lanes metric. The PNB is a powerful metric that can help cities track their progress of growing the cycling network. So with that, I'll just hand it off to Taylor for the formal presentation.
Thank you, Ivona, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all our guests, no matter where in the world you might be. I'm Taylor Rich, and so Ivona briefly introduced the idea of this campaign. ITDP has been working for going on a year now, and for a few years more, our plans with cities, other nonprofit and non-governmental organizations, and other parties all around the world to help cities reach a goal of expanding access to safe cycle lanes. We believe that this is an important climate solution, that cycling can reduce carbon emissions. We believe that cycling can lead to more socially just, more equitable, more inclusive cities and safer cities. But I don't think I need to convince all of you of the importance of cycling. Today, we'll be talking specifically about the importance of open data and how sources of open data, most particularly OpenStreetMap, can be a really, really powerful tool in visualizing, understanding, and most importantly, improving cycling infrastructure in cities. So what is open data? Open data is data that could come from any source, but data that you're free to share, to create, to adapt, and to redistribute as you will, often with some qualifications in terms of attribution and being required to share alike. If you use open data in a project, the results of that project may also have to be open. It's open data, but good open data isn't just free to share and adapt. Good open data must also be in an easy to use and standardized format. It doesn't do anyone any good if you've got an open data set that nobody knows how to use, if it's in a non-standard format. And conversely, if open data comes in a standardized format, and if that format is standardized all the way from Mexico City to Jakarta, that means that everybody around the world can use the same format of data to do the same operations or the same analysis. And so it really multiplies the impact of a tool or a process or interpretation. So open data can be an incredibly scalable tool for good. And so this is open data in general. What is OpenStreetMap in particular? OpenStreetMap is a crowdsourced mapping platform. That means it's kind of like, a sort of naive analogy would be Wikipedia for maps, or Google Maps, but open for everybody to edit and update. This is the kind of thing that if you told me it existed without showing it to me, I wouldn't believe you. I would think that's too good to be true. That's too amazing to be real. But it really is out there. And it's really accurate. If you make an incorrect edit to the map, it'll probably be fixed and you'll be given a warning within half an hour. And so that means that the data is reliable enough that major companies, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, are using OpenStreetMap to power their business. So OpenStreetMap is good enough for these huge tech companies. But even though it's good enough to be used by these tech companies, they don't dominate it. OpenStreetMap is neutral. It's managed by a nonprofit foundation, so it doesn't have the same kind of corporate incentives that other mapping systems might have. It's used by hundreds of millions of people at the end user level every month. It's used for humanitarian and disaster relief. It's also used for logistics, consumer maps, academic research, and urban planning. So how is OpenStreetMap used for all of our favorite field of urban planning? I'm going to skip that slide. OpenStreetMap, specifically, why should we use OpenStreetMap for transportation data? First of all, I've got two reasons. First, OpenStreetMap is easy to work with. You can edit it with nothing but a web browser, and then there are all kinds of tools available out there to download and analyze the data. Second reason, OpenStreetMap is in a standard format globally. I was saying a minute ago that it's important for open data to be in a standard worldwide format. OSM is already like that. So if we work with, for example, if we work with a web developer in Nairobi and they build a tool to analyze OpenStreetMap data, that tool could also be used in Lima or New York or Guangzhou or anywhere on Earth. So those are the two reasons. It's easy to work with and it's a standardized format that we as transportation planners should use OpenStreetMap data. I do want to offer one caveat about OpenStreetMap data before I show you any more, and that's that OpenStreetMap OSM is great for representing the sort of stable conditions of physical space, the presence of a bike lane, the location of a highway interchange, even the location of a shop or a restaurant. It's not so good for representing services, things that change over time, activities. So when you're talking about public transit, for example, OpenStreetMap is ideal for representing the locations of rails, bus stops, BRT lanes, but it's not as good for representing data about transit service. If you want to talk about the actual services of the buses in a BRT system, you can do that in OSM, but there are other tools that are probably better, like GTFS. That caveat aside, we're talking about bicycling today, and bicycling is all about the presence of physical infrastructure. So if I could ask you to walk away from this webinar knowing one thing, it would be that OSM is really easy to edit. And if you see a mistake in OSM, it's up to you to correct it. And to do that, I'm going to show you just how easy it is to edit OpenStreetMap. And this is the openstreetmap.org website, which you can use to access and edit the data. Well, let's zoom in here on my city, Washington, D.C., and we can take a look at how OSM lets us access this data. So this is the downtown area of Washington. You can see streets categorized by their functional class. You can see green areas. You can see transit stops and other important destinations. And if we use the layers function here, we can switch to one of these other layers that highlights the bicycling infrastructure. So these darker blue areas are places with dedicated protected bicycle lanes. And now we can actually zoom in here on 15th Street Northwest, and we can use this query features function to identify the attributes of the street. So the 15th Street Northwest cycle track here is listed as an independent cycle path. You can see that this particular segment of it happens to stretch from P to V streets northwest, and is designated as highway equals cycleway. This is an OpenStreetMap tag designating this as a specifically cycling piece of infrastructure. We might also want to look at what's a good example? At our street northwest here. Our street northwest has cycleway right tagged as lane, meaning that our street has a painted lane, though not a protected one, on the right side of the street. I'll attach some information to this video, including a link to the OpenStreetMap wiki article, where you can learn about the different categorizations of cycle lane tags on OpenStreetMap. Now this is Connecticut Avenue Northwest. Now Connecticut Avenue does not currently have any kind of bicycle infrastructure, but there are plans to build a protected bicycle track on Connecticut Avenue. Once that is complete, then somebody, maybe someone in the city government, maybe an advocate, maybe just any interested citizen, is going to have to go onto OpenStreetMap, open this edit function here to update the map to the new reality. So if it's your first time editing OpenStreetMap, as soon as you load this, you'll see a tutorial introducing how to do this editing. And you'll be able to navigate around. Just give it a minute to load. Right, you can see all of the OpenStreetMap data here in this editable interface. And all we would have to do is click on Connecticut Avenue. You can see here Connecticut Avenue Northwest, one way, because it's a divided highway. And what we'd do is we would add field. We would add bike lanes. Probably they would be on the right side. And we would enter track, which is OpenStreetMap designation for a protected bicycle lane. And that's it. And then we would press this button up in the top right to review and upload. We would also do this for all of the other legs of Connecticut Avenue throughout the area that had new bicycle lanes. Of course, I'm not going to actually do that right now because Connecticut Avenue hasn't been improved yet, and so this would be an inaccurate edit. But that's really all there is to it. You can edit OpenStreetMap in just a couple of minutes. And so I encourage you to go out, check out the OpenStreetMap data in your city, see what's accurate, see what's wrong, and fix the things that are incorrect or fix the things that are missing. Especially when it comes to bicycle lanes, this is very easy to do, and it will be very helpful to help your city measure its progress in bicycling. With ITDP's Cycling Cities campaign, our goal is to help cities all around the world increase the number of people living near protected bicycle lanes by 25%. We think that at least a quarter, if not everyone, should have a protected bicycle lane within 300 meters of their home. Thank you for your attention, and please reach out to me, taylor.reich@itdp.org, if you have any questions about OpenStreetMap or bicycling data in any way.
Great. So thank you so much for this introduction. We can now move into invite Dennis for his presentation.
Yes, thank you. Taylor, I think you need to stop sharing so I can take over. Yes, thank you. All right. All right. Yeah, so Taylor gave you an insight on OSM. Hello, everybody. I'm Dennis. I'm from Trufi Association, and I will show or give an example on what we are at Trufi and how we do use OSM to bring apps or applications to the cities. So what is Trufi? We're a non-profit startup for informal public transport. Our first app was launched in 2018, but a lot of our members have been active in the open data sector far longer than 2018, and the NGO was founded officially in 2019. You can see a picture of one of our group meetings on the right. We're a very global team as well, with a lot of networks into all areas of the globe, if you can say it that way. And our mission is to improve public transport worldwide through digitization, because we have a lot of technical and IT background in our organization. So that is what we made our mission. And therefore our vision is to give people in developing countries the opportunity to choose public transport as an option for their daily commutes or their travel plans, because they are accurate, helpful, and especially attractive. And therefore we developed our so-called flagship product, which is a multi-modal journey planner, which is open source and also enables or is cross-platform enabled. We have a lot of volunteers, we're like a core of like a few more than 40 active volunteers. We have a lot of women as well, and a lot of nationalities. So we're a very diverse group of people that try to bring public transport forward in developing countries. Maybe just a quick insight on what informal transport is. As that is our focus. On the right, you can see a Trufi, which is actually where our name comes from, in Bolivia. Informal transport is the part of the public transport of cities in developing countries, and mostly in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, where there's no official bus stops, there's no schedule, there's no real documentation of bus lines, etc. And that is often mixed with, so there's also semi-formal transport, which is a mixture of formal and informal transport or transit, where they mix, or we try to mix, the informal sector of like Trufis, like you see on the right, with no official bus stops, etc., with a metro or the gondolas, for example. And that is what we mainly work on. Here you can see a map of where we've had projects and have been in discussions and been launching pilots. As you can see, we're mainly active in let's say the global south, so in developing countries, in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia. But recently, 2 cities in Germany, especially Herrenberg and Hamburg, and now some more, have found interest in our way of using open data and OpenStreetMap to provide multimodal journey planning. Our main product is the Trufi app. So you can, it's an open source multimodal journey planner for semi-formal public transport in big cities. And it's really a trip planner with full door-to-door navigation, like a lot of us know it already, but it's just open source. It's built on a very, built on a technology stack that is very emphasized on working in developing countries. And it suggests multiple routes. It integrates all sorts of transport modes and uses an open trip planner as a baseline to do the routing, and OSM for the maps and all of the necessary information for that routing. If we look at how we try to create an impact during our projects, it usually always starts with OpenStreetMap communities, because we have a big outreach into those. So we know a lot of people in the OpenStreetMap community, and therefore have an easy access to the local communities. And that is also why we as an organization decided to put focus especially on empowering people locally from the OpenStreetMap communities to help us make the projects that we try to do in the developing world a success. And as you can see, we usually start by building and supporting the OpenStreetMap communities. We train them on how to do what Taylor just showed you, like how to map the routes of buses, etc. And then we make all of those routes publicly available on OpenStreetMap that are then free to use for everyone. And that is like the main work that needs to be done during projects like these, and probably also the biggest part of the work. And once that data is publicly available, there's a lot of room for innovation. Like, for example, you can use, or like our app can be implemented to use the OpenStreetMap data that we just provided. And the cities can also get a first insight into their public transport system, like because we generate a lot of data with our app that can help cities then plan better transport links with journey patterns from our user data. This is just a short description of the more technical approach. So as I mentioned, we collect and digitalize the data, we train the communities, we then create the standard GTFS format for the data, and then provide the server to make the door-to-door route planning with the OTP server that I mentioned earlier as well. And then we also provide the data in all ways possible to OpenStreetMap and also Google Maps, so that other people can create innovations around that data that we collected. Another big thing that we can do with our application is maintenance of bus routes, because a lot of times in the informal transport sector, especially, the bus routes are not very, so they change frequently, and we wanted to give the users, or the frequent users of our app, who are most probably also contributors to the OSM community, the possibility to contribute data around bus routes also through the app. And this is a very easy way to do that, which we implemented in the application. And yes, this is just an example of the Trufi app in Cochabamba, which was the very first one that started back then in 2018. It's also by far the most used one with 5,000 users. And the bus collection back then happened with the OSM community. And the community there is also very active. We have a community manager there that engages continuously with the community to update routes, to maintain them and contribute further information to the OSM. And how all this connects to, let's say, cycling and biking. We started using, like recently last year, or in 2020, we went to a hackathon and thought about using what we have had as a flagship product back then to use it for a customized app only for cyclists. Because in Hamburg specifically, there's a lot of ferry, so there's public transport that also includes ferries, but none of the ferries were really prominent in, for example, Google Maps. So if you look for the route that you can see here on Google Maps, you wouldn't find the route that you are being suggested here with including the ferry on Google Maps. And that's why we started using OSM as well to provide different routing that is specifically made for cyclists. And it's optimized for the use of bikes in combination with public transport, because here in Germany, for example, there's blocking times of where you cannot take your bike on the train, for example, and we promote all of that data that is open to give the cyclists the best user experience possible when planning their routes or doing their routes. So that is how it started. It was with the win of the hackathon, and then we did an MVP, and it's now called Not Without My Bike in English. It's Nicht ohne mein Rad in German, and it's specifically for Hamburg. And as you can see, it's in German right now because it's in Germany, the application, so it's not in English yet. But as you can see, we have a routing app that is specifically for cyclists, to say so, and it integrates with a lot of the services that are already available in the Hamburg let's say, app landscape, because that's what the users wanted. And here you can see that, yeah, you do the routes and it's also multimodal. So you have different route suggestions, and it also provides the option to choose between if you want to do your route with more biking, with biking and public transport, or with more public transport in case, for example, it rains. Yeah, and it integrates, like I mentioned, the ferries and blocking times for bikes on public transport, which is, yeah, a thing here in Germany at least. And there's now plans to further promote this application and also integrate it into the landscape of the mobility applications that the city of Hamburg already has, because the feedback of the community has been very positive, of the biking community in Hamburg. Yes, it was launched on the ITS. I don't know if everybody knows the ITS. It's a very big conference. It was last year in October, and the application got launched there with a lot of visitors, got a lot of impressions, and yeah, we had a lot of meetings on the app, and wanted to see how we can further promote the open data and OpenStreetMap approach for biking specifically, which is why we are starting to move more into the active transport sector right now. And that's a little bit about the story, how we moved from only public transport into the also active transport sector as Trufi. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dennis. And also I dropped link to Trufi's website so that attendees can see more projects and read more about them on your website. This was amazing. So with that, I would like to invite Felipe to tell us how Cyclomapa works for Brazilian cities.
Let me share my screen. Yeah, I guess it's working. So hi, everyone. I'm Felipe Alves from Fortaleza, Brazil. And I'm one of the creators and the coordinator by Brazil Cyclists Union, UCB side of Cyclomapa. That is this web app to show cycling maps. So a little bit of context. We know that the map with the cycling infrastructures, it's a really important tool for advocacy. And we don't have a good map of all the cities, but as a national association, UCB gives people the opportunity to upload their cycling maps of their cities to UCB websites. And this was the result, to have these really different kinds of maps with really different kinds of information, really different patterns. So this was our motivation to build a centralized solution with maps of any Brazilian cities in just one place. We wanted to use open data, and we wanted it to be collaborative, and we wanted to create a standard type of how we call each of the infrastructure. And we wanted to give the advocacy a better tool for they to use to talk with their city managers, and also give the data for anyone to use any way they want. So some people from UCB and ITDP Brazil met at Piscicultura, that it's a Brazilian national encounter of cycling advocacy, and we have the idea to create this tool. So we have to discuss a little bit of cycling infrastructure, just for you to understand what is in the map. So these are the 4 types of cycling infrastructure that we consider. This is based mainly in Brazilian technical manuals. So we call shared sidewalks the infrastructure that are on the sidewalks shared with pedestrians. We don't like it so much because it usually takes away space from pedestrians, and we prefer that it's on the streets, taking away space from cars. We have the cycle routes, that how it's called in Portuguese, ciclorota, but it's also, you may know it in the US and in other countries as Cheryl. It's just a regular street. Usually it has to have low speed and low traffic, and it's signalized with Cheryls for sharing the space with cyclists. And then we have the two dedicated infrastructures that are the cycle lanes. It's just a painted lane on the street. It can have in some cases, some small elements of segregation, like flex posts or smaller elements, and in some cases even a buffer lane or a parking lane. But the main characteristic of this, it's on the street and the cycle tracks or the fully segregated bikeways that are the best infrastructures. And what we had to do is to translate the information from OpenStreetMap, OSM, to these kinds of layers. And not only this, but other layers that we wanted to show. In OSM, you have each way with its unique tags and values, and you have to translate that language to a language that anyone could understand. And besides these cycling infrastructures, the ways, we also have some points of interest that are also shown in layers, like the bike shops, the bike sharing stations, the bike parking places, and also some other points of interest that aren't part of the cycling infrastructure, but can help some cyclists, like water fountains or air pumps and public restrooms. So a little bit of how it works. I was planning to make a demo, but I guess we don't have enough time for that. So just show the usual screen that you see at the website. Here, you can see the city of Fortaleza, that is my city. When you choose a city, you see all the infrastructure of the city. You can zoom in, out, you can click on any infrastructure to see some details. You can turn on or turn off the layers. You can also download all the data of the city for any use you want to give, and you have at the right side a sidebar with some metrics of the cycling infrastructure of the city. So basically, we have these three layers. Now we have the base map that it's on Mapbox. We have the OSM data that we get from OSM, and we have this metric that is calculated with the OSM data. The Mapbox base map is just use a map from Mapbox, that it's a company that uses OSM data. So it uses open data and provided open maps that you can use for any application you want. In our case, it's not a commercial use, and we also don't have a lot of requests, so we use a free version of a base map. The OSM data, as I said, you have to translate the language in OSM to a language that anyone can understand. So this is a lot of code details that I will not get into. And the metrics there are some indicators that we calculate based on the data. So we have, for example, the people near bikeways, the PNB, that I guess Dana will talk a bit more about it later. It's an indicator of the percentage of the people that lives near to the bikeways in the city. You have here in Brazil this cycle development index. It is an index created by one association, one civil society association, Amiciclo, in Recife, and the goal of this is to evaluate the quality of the total network of the city. We also calculate the total length of each one of the infrastructure and of the total network, and the total number of points of interest of each type. And some of our results are, we have here the number of access, the number of users, and the rating on the platform, the feedback rating by the users. And this is the Mobilidados. It's a data platform of ITDP Brazil that also uses Cyclomapa data. Actually, it's not Cyclomapa data, it's OSM data, but with Cyclomapa, it's easier to download the data, just the data that you want. to calculate some indicators for the Brazilian cities. This is one research they did. This is the graph of the PNB for all of the state capitals. And not only the PNB that they calculate, but in this research, they compared the PNBs for Black population and white population and low income population and high income population to see these inequalities. This is another research from IPEA. It's the Institute of Applied Economics. It's a governmental institute, and this calculates the time for each cluster of population in the city to opportunities. So opportunities, they show job opportunities, education, and health, and you can calculate it by bus, by foot, or by bike. And to calculate it by bike, they need the cycle infrastructure, and they get it from OSM by Cyclomapa as well. This is some of the media coverage we had, and some of the events we participate. We usually are really well, they talk really well about Cyclomapa in urbanism portals, in mobility portals, and also in the OSM community. So I guess that's it. These are the contacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe. And this was a great prequel to Dana's presentation on people near protected bike lanes.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to Taylor, Felipe, and Dennis for your great presentations. I think it really shows the diversity that sources like OpenStreetMap can offer us in terms of understanding infrastructure and how our cities are working. So I just want to wrap up the presentation portion of the webinar today by talking a little bit about how this links into ITDP's Cycling Cities campaign. Taylor sort of gave a nice little introduction, but for those who are maybe not familiar with Cycling Cities, we launched the campaign last year at COP26 in Glasgow. And we're working with a cohort of 28 cities, as well as a whole slew of partner organizations, including Trufi and UCB, to really improve conditions for cycling in cities. And a big part of that is improving cycle infrastructure. So the target for the campaign is focused on bringing 25 million more people near safe cycle lanes by 2025. And the idea here is really to create a stronger link between cycle infrastructure and people who use that infrastructure for their everyday trips. And so that's why we've structured the target around increasing the number of people that are near these lanes, as opposed to just sort of a total target that is focused on kilometers of cycle lanes. But of course, one of the big things we're focusing on for this year as part of the campaign is working with those 28 cities to really expand their cycle networks and improve safety and access to these cycle lanes starting this year, and of course going through the next couple of years. So one of the ways that we are tracking progress and really evaluating the effectiveness of cycle infrastructure is using a metric called people near protected bike lanes. So both Taylor and Felipe mentioned PNB, which is people near bike lanes. So that's all types of bike lanes. Felipe had a great slide about the different types of cycle infrastructure that we see in cities, from shared streets to unprotected lanes to protected lanes. For the Cycling Cities campaign, we're really focused on those protected bike lanes. There's a lot of evidence that shows that this type of lane is really what gets most people out on bikes, provides the level of safety that's necessary to to encourage people to cycle for more trips. So we're really focused on getting this high quality protected bike infrastructure in place. So we're using this more narrow metric, people near protected bike lanes, to try to push for that. So PNPB measures the number of people in a city that have access to protected bike infrastructure, and we use a 300-meter buffer as sort of the amount or the distance that an average cyclist would be willing to walk their bike in order to access one of these protected lanes. So we calculate this by taking the total number of people who live within 300 meters of a protected lane, divide that by the total city population. And we're able to do these calculations, pulling data from places like OpenStreetMap and other open data sources like the Global Human Settlement Layer. So what does this look like in an actual city? This is an example. This is the city of Istanbul, and you can see all of the protected cycle lanes are the yellow lines, and then the green areas around them are the sort of buffer areas of 300 meters and the people who have reasonable access to those cycle lanes. And you can start to see how this type of visualization can really help cities think about where to prioritize additional kilometers of cycle lanes in order to start connecting gaps in the network and bringing cycle infrastructure to neighborhoods and communities where it does not currently exist, and really encouraging cycling for those communities. So when we talk about our goal for the campaign of bringing 25 million more people near safe cycle lanes, that breaks down to each of our 28 cohort cities increasing the number of people who live near protected bikeways by 25 percentage points. So on this slide are just a couple of our cycling cities, just as examples to kind of show this breakdown. So in Bogota, currently about 44% of the population lives within 300 meters of a protected bike lane. And under the campaign, they would be looking to increase that percentage to about 69% of the population. Whereas for Los Angeles, currently about 5% of the population is living close to protected cycle lanes, and they would be looking to increase that to 30% of the population. And then the row along the bottom in blue are an approximation of the number of kilometers that would be needed to support that 25 percentage point increase in each of the cities. So Bogota would be looking to build an additional 160 kilometers or so of protected cycle lanes by 2025. Los Angeles would be looking at about 480 kilometers, Santiago 330 kilometers, and so on. And then just to wrap up, I kind of wanted to put this into kind of a framework of how we think about tying all of these threads together. So, we have citizens who are advocating for safer, better spaces to cycle in the street, to that infrastructure being built and then ultimately mapped in OpenStreetMap. But as it stands, in this scenario, this is really a one-way flow of information. And what's really important is connecting this big data set of OpenStreetMap back to the kind of key stakeholders that need to use it. So what's really important here is platforms like Cyclomapa, like the Trufi app, and ITDP is also working to develop an open source platform that will calculate metrics like PNB and PNPB, and start to translate some of this more technical data and this large amount of data that's accessible through OpenStreetMap to communicate that in a way that citizens and planners can actually use to inform their decision making. So we really think that this kind of completes the wheel, if you will, and is really critical, again, in communicating and making this data really actionable. So I will stop there and invite our panelists to, I think everyone is already on video, but we'll move into a bit of a moderated discussion. And I saw that there's some great discussion happening in the chat as well, and some good questions for our panelists in there. So we have about 10 minutes. So we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. And of course, we're happy to answer questions offline as well. So just to kick things off to you, Taylor, I wanted to just get your thoughts quickly. ITDP does a lot of its work in low and middle income cities, and there's always a challenge that's presented with accessing and updating and verifying data in some of these challenging contexts. So can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe how OSM can actually address some of these barriers or be a solution to some of those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely, Dana. So, of course, data is really key, really necessary for planning anything. And of course, it can be kind of costly to collect data, to do a complete inventory of streets or bike lanes for a whole city where you don't already have that data. It's a pretty big undertaking. And so that's why OpenStreetMap is really so valuable, as it provides sort of a crowdsourced, open, free, and reliable, and easy to use way for cities to access data on streets and locations in the city. We have seen in a number of cities, global north and global south alike, kind of reluctance from city leaders to work with OpenStreetMap. They think, oh, because this is user editable, that means it's not reliable, but really the opposite. OpenStreetMap is much more reliable a lot of the time than other sources of data might be. And I mean, it's reliable enough that major private companies, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, use it every day for hundreds of millions of users. And the fact that it's user editable means that any government can take an active role in ensuring that OpenStreetMap data is in fact up to date and reflects the situation on the ground. So I think that governments all over the world and cities of all income levels have a huge opportunity to improve their data workflows by embracing OpenStreetMap, and that they can do this by engaging with OpenStreetMap both as data creators, editors, and consumers.
Great, thanks, Taylor. And that's a good segue, I think, actually, to a question for you, Dennis. There's some interest in the chat, and I want to kind of drag home this point, and some of your work really touches on this. Can you talk a little bit more about how Truffi works with OpenStreetMap communities? It seems like a lot of folks on the webinar today are not as familiar with OpenStreetMap and may not even realize that these communities exist. Can you talk a little bit more about OpenStreetMap communities and how Truffi has really leveraged these groups to improve your data gathering and using of this data?
So yeah, a lot of people in our organization have been or are part of the OpenStreetMap communities themselves, and therefore know a lot of people in there as well. For example, we have one colleague here, Leonardo, who's also been very active in the OpenStreetMap community, for example. And he has found, for example, our Trufi code around the app that we provided, and therefore got in touch with us to see how he could leverage the OSM data to bring a route planner to the city of Duitama, for example. And then he created his own app for the city and is now, yeah, let's say, crucial part of Trufi as well. So we try to engage with the communities to leverage their reach out and their knowledge about all of the public transport or informal public transport sectors. Like I mentioned in the chat, we usually, the operators of such informal, such informal transport are usually not very willing to share their data around their routes or stops and all of that. So therefore we try to reach out to OSM communities, and we, in some projects, for example, we've had people really going onto a bus and riding it the whole day to see where it stops, how far it goes, and then writing everything down so that we can then, in a second step, digitize all of that information, create a GTFS, and provide it to the OSM community. So that is really how we engage with the OSM community, as we are ourselves contributors to the community as well, and see that as a crucial part to giving cities new insights into their public transport system, and like what's possible with that, which is where it comes in that open data is really an enabler of innovation as well, because it opens up a lot of new opportunities for people where there were none before. So yeah, and everybody can contribute, it's open. So yes, it's really built for the people, to say so.
Yeah, great. And then I'll go to you, Felipe. The Cyclomapa platform really came from sort of the civil society sector with UCB and ITDP Brazil. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how the cities have responded to that data being available. Have they taken up some of the metrics that are displayed on Cyclomapa, and have there been conversations about using some of those metrics as ways to track progress, or really kind of inform some of those decision making at the city level?
Thank you. Yes, the data platform from ITDP Brazil, the Mobilidados platform, also does a time series of the PNB, for example, and various other indicators. And some city halls use these graphics and these data to show the progress. Of course, just the ones that have some progress, the other ones don't like that so much. But it's the, in this case, the civil society have to take this data and show how it's bad and go to the city managers to talk to them. And we provide this data for them to compare with similar cities, show how is it good, how is it bad. And he really can have a conversation with the public managers with some good data.
Great, thanks, Felipe. That's great to hear that there's some real uptake of this work. I think maybe we have time for one more question. We're closing in on the hour here. This may have been maybe addressed a little bit in the chat, but it seemed like there were a number of questions around ability to, I guess this maybe goes to Dennis, ability to generalize some of the data that's being used for Trufi's apps. But maybe you can talk a little bit more about, you kind of touched on this initially in your response, kind of the next step here, which is taking the OSM data and really making it available for either people or governments to actually use for their own purposes. So can you just talk a little bit more about that ability to generalize, or like how the data being open source really facilitates that type of generalization?
So in regards to the generalization, I think that the question was that how we can generalize our application for it to be able to be used in different cities. As of right now, it's, as we're an NGO, it's, let's say, quite hard to do that, because that involves a lot of work, and it's probably a way bigger project than just creating an open source application that can be adapted by each city or like municipality, like small cities and all of that, which is what our focus was in the beginning, to help to really give the possibilities to every city in developing countries to do that by themselves even, and have it very lightweight. And I think generalizing that would be, yeah, a bigger initiative that would require a lot more partners to do it. I mean, of course, it would be the dream scenario of like just probably having one app and then you can use it everywhere in Brazil or everywhere in, yeah, in whichever country. I'm pretty sure that, yeah, I mean, there are apps like that already, but I'm not sure on if there's, yeah, if we can do it with our app right now, because we are also yeah, an NGO with limited resources and all sorts of kinds. So we really focus on trying to bring that application and the open source methodology to the cities to, let's say, open their eyes and like bring them new insights on what's possible with open data. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Dennis. And thanks to Felipe and Taylor as well for your time and for sharing your experiences. There was a lot of interest in the chat, and I'm sure some good follow-up for all of you. So I think I'll turn it back to Ivona to just close us out.
Great, thank you so much, Dana. Indeed, we ran out of time, so I'll just make a couple of closing announcements. So we will follow up to this session with an email including links, of course, the recording. This will be available in about a day or two. I also encourage everyone to visit ITDP website and social media to be up to date with the latest releases and upcoming events. And I also added a link in the chat to our next event, which will be a webinar on e-buses, and we'll have speakers from Mexico and Brazil. So with that, I thank again the moderator, panelists, as well as the attendees for joining this event. Thank you, and see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.